Today, I have a fascinating conversation with Will Curran from Endless Events. Will has been in our industry for many years, got an amazing perspective, and also he's going to be sharing what are the different trends that we should pay attention to. Enjoy my conversation with Will. Hello, and welcome to a new episode of the Business of Meeting podcast. And today, I'm extremely happy to be speaking with the guy. Actually, it's one of the first time I see his real face. We usually have the cartoon for his face. He is the CEE, the Chief Events Einstein of Endless Events. Ladies and gentlemen, Will Curran, how are you?
Thanks so much for having me, Eric. This is, I'm doing really good. I'm stoked. We get to talk about two of my favorite things, business and events. Like, that's why I got into what I do.
Awesome. And how did you get into what you do?
Oh, this is like a long story. And I'm sure there's recordings where I tell like the whole hour long, story, but here's the long story short of it. In high school, super nerdy, loved electronic music, started an internet radio station, became a DJ, started DJing in my bedroom, started DJing backyard parties in high school. Basically started a DJ company in high school. Then went to college, DJ company blew up, got huge, then realized like I didn't want to just DJ backyard parties. I wanted to do like big, large scale productions and high school dances and college events. So started hiring production companies, learned everything I could about production, said, this is where all the money is. This is where I'm passionate about. So then transformed it into a production company, started doing gigantic corporate events, doing production. Then, I started obviously falling into a lot of event technology, started publishing a ton of content about event technology and events in general. Started a couple podcasts along the way. And then, essentially the pandemic really pushed us to us helping with every aspect of the event because technology was the center of everything. And so for the first time ever, instead of being the last thing that everyone worried about, it was the front. So we basically transitioned to becoming a full-scale event management company. So now we take care of strategy, venue sourcing, the technology, obviously the production aspect, entertainment, the speakers, the analytics, every single aspect of the entire event. And that's what we do now.
That's awesome. You know what? I was listening to you and said, oh, he had the life I wanted to have. Because when I was a teenager and then when I studied business in Belgium, it was the time of the free radio. So it was illegal to broadcast.
Oh my gosh.
And so you will hear the guy on radio said, well, the police is coming into the building to seize the equipment. We will start broadcasting again in a few hours. Stay tuned. And then it became legal, but I was and I wanted to work on radio, and I was a party animal, going to nightclubs all the time. I wanted to be a DJ. I wanted to work on radio, and I was playing video games. My only problem.
Oh my God, yeah.
20 years too early. I would have made a fortune today.
That's pretty much the exact journey that I had. Yeah, like I loved radio. I love like sharing music with people, and then the opportunity to like get an even more intimate relationship, getting to do that DJing wise, and then audiences get bigger. Like, I think that if it wasn't really for DJing, I probably wouldn't be the more extroverted kind of person you see now. Like I would probably be like a coder, a hacker, a computer guy, and I probably wouldn't talk to anybody at all.
And you were still doing DJ?
Yeah, it's not anymore. I mean, occasionally in my bedroom, I'll put on some electronic music, put together a mixtape, but not anymore. Definitely not in front of people, for sure. Because now I can't imagine with Spotify and how like niche everybody's taste of music is. Like it's so hard to please everybody. So I'm glad I got out when I got out, because honestly, too, like I definitely love the more complexity of the event design and the event strategy, and I'm a huge business nerd now too. So I think I found like my true calling for sure.
What is business nerd? As you qualify it,
like for me, thinking like I love watching videos that talk about dissecting people's businesses. So right now, I'm like, it's a lot. We're in the age of like a technology, so a lot of tech companies and things like that. Hearing about like how they came up with their business stories. So for example, Uber had their they did the drama version of their story of how they started, right? And it's on Showtime that you can watch. I think it's called Super Pumped. And I think it's so fascinating that like Uber as a business was like, yeah, we have this idea. And, I don't think they were truly thinking about disrupting it. They were just like, this is just a smarter way of doing it. But like, I think it's so clever when they growth hacked the idea of like, they wanted to get more drivers. So they literally gave iPhones to drivers because drivers didn't have smartphones then. Like, I think stuff like that when it comes to business is just so mind blowing. and I nerd out on that. Like I can talk to anybody about any like business. Like my friend has a climate accounting company, and I like nerd out with them. I'm like, so how this and this and all it could be used for this, and your business can scale this way. I love nerding out on that sort of thing.
Ah, interesting. I just posted my LinkedIn today, actually, a video from Steve Jobs,
Mm.
when he was explaining how they came up with the brand campaign about
Oh
think
wow.
differently with Apple.
Oh wow.
Fascinating his the way he's thinking and how he's positioning it. Absolutely mind blowing.
I'll have to
When
look
you
up that
look
one.
at all those videos, all these theories, is there anything you're applying to your business, and what is it? So a few examples, because there's a lot of business owners that are listening
Mhm.
to this podcast. What is the two or three things that, what, that is something that I learned and I implement in my company, and it worked very well?
Yeah, it now it's not as much as it used to be. When I was smaller, it was really easy for me to like hear an idea and just be like implement, and I'm going to run with it, and because the team was small and because, like it was primarily the Will show in a lot of ways, like that was so easy for me to do, but now like if I do it, people are like, "Oh no, not another like Will idea." So it's a little bit harder as you scale up, but I definitely all the time am trying to pull ideas from other places. Like one of my favorite, like for example, I'll give you an example, a little less recent example, but in like 2013, 2014 or so, I was reading the book Epic Content Marketing. I know this isn't necessarily a video, but it's the same concept. I probably would have heard it in like a video nowadays.
From
And they
Joy
talk, uh,
Polizzi?
Epic Content Marketing. It's like talks a lot about like how these brands were using content marketing to do what they do. And one of the concepts that is talking about is like how that the future of business marketing is not that you just market to people. Instead, you're like a publishing house. And they're talking about like how Red Bull doesn't do marketing. They just have a TV channel where they have awesome content. And then people just like are excited. They do things like space jumps and people just get excited about that. And so I was like, yeah, to be honest, all the brands I can think of now, like they're all doing this. And then, it talked about how he's like, but you need a tool like HubSpot to be able to measure the exact ROI of the content. And I was like, that's a big thing. We've been doing some blogs and stuff, but I have no idea what's actually making money or not. And then go and Google HubSpot. And I'm like, whoa, this tool seems so cool. I got to get this, and like less than like, I think a month later, I implemented it. A month later, I taught myself how to run it, the whole entire thing. And then before we knew, we were doing the whole inbound strategy that we've been doing for so many years. So, I think there's a lot of times that like I'll see something and I try to correlate it back to my experience and what I think is in the future, and then kind of do a check against those sort of things. And I'm definitely, I think that sometimes a little bit more conservative than some other innovative people, but I'm also, I think, more innovative than most people, if in some ways.
Got it. You are the intersection of business and events, and although you mentioned rightly, even design and objective
Mhm.
things like that, what I observe too many times is that business owners or independent planners rather don't see
Mhm.
themselves really as business
Oh
owners,
no, 100%. They're just in
and
the industry.
and that's a problem because they are,
Yeah.
they should really be interested with the basics of running their own business.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've noticed the last 2 years, obviously, is, as Mike Tyson would say, everybody's got a plan until he got punched in the face.
For
So,
sure.
how did you react to the pandemic? What have you learned? What are you doing different today to manage your company?
Yeah. So I'll do a quick sidebar because this is probably the only time I'll ever get to tie where you're from to this whole story of the pandemic, but this is going to blow your mind. So back in, 2019 or so, I heard about this music festival in Belgium called Rampage. It's a drum and bass music festival. All my favorite artists were going to play. It's like, this was going to be like the pinnacle of all my, like, I was going to get to check off so many people off my bucket list, right? Bought my tickets, bought the flights, everything like that. So March 2020 rolls around. I was like having my busiest year yet. I was doing so many speaking engagements. I was flying to Vegas to go to my mastermind group, and then was literally flying back, grabbed my suitcase, and was going to fly to Belgium. Like literally, this is like early mid March or so.
Yeah.
And so I remember that all of what was happening was going on. But I was like, we were already remote at the time. We got lucky that 7 years ago, I decided that I was like, why do we pay for an office? This doesn't make any sense at all. Right. And so like when everything was kind of converting, it was kind of like, oh, this isn't a big deal. And none of my clients had canceled at that point. like all of them, some of them were actually looking at adding more services. So like this pandemic was like good for me. I was like, oh my gosh, you want to do live streaming? We've been telling you need to live stream your event for so long. So anyways, I'm coming back from Vegas and I'm planning on like just taking off the festival. And I've been watching videos. They're like, we're not canceling this festival. We're never going to cancel this festival. Belgium had like 2 cases at the time. And I was like, oh, I'm going to make this happen. And so literally I'm about to get on the plane to go back to Phoenix. And I can see the Instagram notification and it says festival's been canceled. So I get back home and I was supposed to be like, gone for like a week for this entire festival. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, if this festival that said they would never cancel, that it was the day before the stage was already built, millions of dollars in production, already built, was ready to go, and they canceled. I was like, this is going to come and wreck the United States, which I knew that the United States was lagging behind in terms of the effects of everything else happening. So I was like, okay, well, we have all this free time now. So I started kind of like reflecting on it and I was like, you know what? I'm going to take this as an opportunity. Like everybody's looking to us for event tech. So I was literally started hitting up everybody. I was like, I'm happy to talk about virtual events. I know that I can help people out. Like we've done virtual events before. We've done hybrid events before. Like we can do this. So I just started like going on a merry chase of trying to help people. And then the clients started calling. We have to cancel our event. We have to go 100% virtual. How do we do this? And just like 2020 was just absolutely insane for us. Like we blew up almost in a bad way because we got so big so fast. It was like almost like uncontrolled growth in some ways. But it was like, I got lucky that I had a little bit of foresight. I don't consider March to be the most amazing foresight, but there's some companies that I think that were still doubting this like in May, June, July or so. So we just got really, really busy. And, it was definitely like a punch in the face in terms of like, it was just busier than we ever thought it would be. But part of me was also like, as an entrepreneur was also like, look, I'm going to go for this. And, if I end up having to move into my friend's, second bedroom and, sell my car and do all these things, like I was prepared to do it because like I knew that this was going to affect everybody. And it did. It like destroyed the whole industry, like, and tore it all apart. So, I think the first thing was just like, luckily we had so much thought leadership built up from all the content we were doing. So that all that content marketing really paid off in 2020. And then I think the other thing too was just being prepared to be flexible with what everyone needed. And, I think one of the biggest things too is like not putting my foot down 100%. There were so many production companies, I think at that time, and event companies that were just like, we're going to weather the storm. This is only going to last 3-4 months. Like I started thinking like, how is this going to affect us, 2-3 years now? And, as we're going into 2023 and 2024 and beyond, like we're talking recessions and economic downturn now. I'm preparing to think like, how is this all going to change? And all those things like that. Like how can I do things differently than everybody else is doing? And how can I make my business in that way?
Very good. So have you already like see where you can cut costs and put some money aside? And
yeah, so that's like where I'm thinking now is like, how can I go from being a very big fixed cost business? Like, how do I go from having so many costs that I literally are really hard to change really fast to becoming more variable? And I go through these cycles, I think, in business. I've been doing this like 15 years now. So like if there's times where you're like, oh, I'm gonna have tons of fixed costs. And then I feel like it then it turns around and you go, I need to reduce my fixed costs when it comes to it. So I think just like part of me after doing this for 15 years thinks like being variable is a very, very beneficial thing because that's where a lot of competitors can't go. They can't figure out how to manage contractors properly. They can't figure out how to maintain brand voice and quality as they're bringing on contractors or not contractors. How can they make it so they can reduce, costs like their office down on there. So yeah, so definitely thought a lot about like the cost portion, but also too, like what's the conversation going to be with clients now moving forward? What is this going to exactly look like? I think that's also like the conversations that we need to have. And then I think the last piece is too, is like not being afraid to say, no, I think this is going to really like hurt us. Like we need to be considering things like inflation and rising costs and, how can we prepare to do those things? And I think the biggest thing is being able to move fast. And that's always been, I think, a benefit of Endless. But, obviously when we got huge in terms of fixed costs, you don't move as fast as you used to.
Right. No, you remind me a little bit of what I observed more than 10 years ago in Europe. There was, first of all, there was a consolidation in the AV company and production company.
Oh, yeah.
And then the next phase was, we don't need to have all this material in our warehouse.
Like the equipment and everything like that.
The equipment, plus we need to buy all the time. There's new equipment coming up.
Yeah.
And so they sold that, outsourced it, and start renting it out.
That's smart. Yeah, nice. That's exactly what our model was when we were a production company, not an event management company. And we still kind of carry that forward into event management was it was about the time we went remote. Like I had a warehouse still with all my equipment in it because I was chasing the traditional model and kind of doing the rat race kind of thing for a business owner. And I was like, I wasn't hardly ever in the warehouse because my team was executing events, or we'd drive, or it sucked because we'd literally drive all of our equipment there and we never, then we'd get back from the event. We'd be like, oh, we'll come by on next Wednesday and clean it all. And then the next event would come by and we were like, oh, we forgot to clean it. Oh my gosh, this is the worst. I realized I didn't really like maintaining the equipment. The equipment part wasn't why I did this. I did it like because of the design and I like the technology solving and simplification piece. And so I made an active decision to start saying, we don't own equipment, sold the equipment and went purely rental. And the challenge I initially had, and I think the reason why I was afraid to do it was that so many people in the industry were like, oh, if you don't own the equipment, you're not real. You're not a legit company. And that's one reason I didn't go remote too, is I was afraid to tell people I was working in my home. I had to, but then what I realized is as I started talking to people more about it, some people reaffirmed it and would describe it back to me in better language that I would then bring forward. So, you talk about the not only equipment part, we would tell people like, we don't own equipment. And before I'd say that, they'd be like, oh, you're not good. What if they'd ask questions like, well, that means you're renting everything. It's going to be more expensive. And I didn't have a good answer for that. And then the other one was like, what happens if something breaks? And then like my answer shifted. And feel free, whoever's out there, if you're a production company listening to this, feel free to steal my model of what I did. But I tell people, look, you don't want to own it because technology is changing so fast that why would you want to buy something that's going to be out of date in a year? But also I use that as a benefit to say, why on earth would I also want to try to sell you on what I have in my warehouse? Because that might not be what you actually need. Like I might be trying to sell you something that's old and outdated when in reality, for the same price, I could get you something that's way better. And then I think the last thing about like what happens when things break is that I realized as I did events more and more often is they just wanted stories to like understand what happens in those cases. So I'd start telling people about stories about like, we had one client who went on stage, the CEO gets on and is like, hey, let's block this entire center screen because we don't want to reveal that we have a gigantic, LED screen. And we're like, okay. And he's like, can you make that happen? We're like, yeah, totally. We call up our vendor. They drove the drape over, they obviously paid for it because it was like an extremely fast delivery, but we got it and had the drape set up before the CEO even finished his rehearsal. And it's like, I think those kind of examples help people understand, like you can have a different model and it can still work really well. There is some challenges sometimes because you can't just give away equipment for free, but like, at the same time too, I pursued clients who weren't looking for a free LED screen. I look for clients who like want basic value. I went after a very specific person who I could help them save money. And that worked out really, really well in the ability to create that unique business model.
When you were speaking, I was thinking, okay, you remind me in what you say about the financial advisor in pick any very well-known bank who basically is going to sell you, first of all, their product instead of what is the most interesting for you.
Totally.
That's exactly what you were doing with not having the equipment that you had to sell. That you had to place whatever your events, but pick what is more convenient and what is new for your customer.
Yeah. And it was nice for us because we loved it because we became a people company. We like hired great engineers and things like that. We literally were flying into events. The truck just shows up. We take all the equipment, we build it all, we do everything, and then got done, put it on a truck, and we didn't have to ever deal with it again, which was just like, that was such a liberating thing that we really love to do. And I don't know if there's many like event companies who are like, I love having a warehouse. I love being in the maintaining stuff business. It's like, no, we're in the like experience design, kind of business,
And that's also a very good way of working on variable cost instead of having a heavy fixed cost.
Oh, it was great. Yeah. Like if we were busy and had a lot of events, we had pay lots of vendor fills. But then when things were slow, like our costs were like nothing. So it like allowed us to be like, put more money into things like marketing and all these other things.
Yeah. Also, another thing you mentioned the people. I don't know how many times I've heard our most important asset are our people. And then when something happened, then they forget about that.
Totally.
I'm leading right now a SaaS company, CQ6, and we kept everyone, not only in the US, but worldwide during the pandemic, because we identified the fact that this is our most important resource, that it takes a lot of time to train the right people. This morning, I was reading an article about Scribe Media in Austin, where they basically kept everyone as well during the pandemic and now raising the salaries based on the inflation. So there's always a way when it's your own company to make
Mhm.
decision and build a culture. What do you see as coming up in the next years now that people like to work remotely more than being 5 days in the week in the office? Now that they see that they have more opportunities, now that we're looking at the change in our industry and the way people do business, what do you see coming up in terms of culture and what are you doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, we were the same way. Like we actually luckily didn't have to let anybody go during the pandemic. In fact, we hired way more people. The question is like hiring lots and lots of people, was that a good decision? Probably now in hindsight, I've been like, maybe I've wanted to like slow growth a little bit on it. But when it comes to like where the future of that culture and people are going, I might not have the perfect answer, but I'll tell you right now that, when the pandemic first broke out, I was like, oh, great. Everyone's going to learn about remote. This is so great for everything. And then I thought to myself, we're going to kill it. Like, this is going to be such an advantage. We've already done this. We've been doing it for years. I think for the first year, it really helped us. And maybe a little bit into like 2021, it helped us a bit. But definitely now I'm kicking myself in the ass because I'm like, our competitive advantage, like our number one competitive advantage for why people want to come work for us. We used to be like one of the few larger remote companies in the events industry. And so like when people are like, so I can work for you and do what I do normally, but I don't have to come to an office, they were like, I don't care about anything else. That's the greatest benefit in the entire world. Now it's so much harder because that's like the baseline. We'll see if I think in the next 2 years, if people revert back to offices and then the people who truly want to stay remote happen. But I think there's going to be enough remote companies now moving forward. So I think that's one of the challenges that we are going to have on here. I think when it comes to people and kind of what that next trend of culture is going to look like is that I do think that people are going towards being able to be more natural with also more international hires too, being more global businesses than they were before. And this was something I think that was beneficial to Endless too, was that like, once we went remote, I knew how to communicate very well. And then I learned basically how to communicate internationally across like, people who weren't, English was a second language or time zone difference was massive. And sometimes even play that to the benefit of us. And I think that, that's going to be a huge future. In fact, I see it like now where like even a lot of my international employees, they say they're getting approached by American companies now more and more than they ever were. So I think like the stigma of like hiring an international employee is going away.
Mm,
Obviously we have to figure out like the financial and, the insurance stuff and like all these things like the legalities and that sort of stuff when it comes to it. But
yeah.
there's, I think a huge opportunity there. I think the other opportunity too is that I think we saw an initial displacement of people moving from places like San Francisco to places like Phoenix and, like cheaper places, cheaper, larger metropolitan areas. Maybe they moved from New York City to Chicago instead. But I think what we're going to really see, and I saw someone on LinkedIn post this too, is I think we're going to see an even further displacement. Once this gets even more comfortable and people feel really comfortable with it, I think you're going to see people move to like Montana, Kansas, like really, really rural areas because it's so much cheaper. Because even Phoenix, that used to be considered the cheap place to live, is ridiculously expensive now. Like not ridiculously, but more expensive than it was before. So I think people are going to be comfortable with like more rural areas. So we have to be comfortable with the idea of our employees going there. And I think we, as like a country, we need more infrastructure, better, faster internet,
Yeah.
all those things like that. So I think that's a huge trend. But also too, the trend towards digital nomads, like the idea that people are like, why do I even have a house? Like, let me just like travel the world all the time. And I think for some positions, that's going to work really, really well. I think what's keeping us from doing that right now is that flight costs are just like ridiculously expensive. No, like a flight can cost you as much as rent costs you in one single month
Mm.
if you decide that you want to bounce around a little bit. So I think those are things that we have to support. And then I think one thing that's going to kind of happen too is that people are going to kind of like get over the bullshit. I guess you say like, how many
Oh, I
times,
hope this happens.
like there's so many like companies, I think, where people, like I feel like to think that I always can improve and I can always do better as a business and as a culture and everything like that.
Yeah.
But sometimes I hear stories from friends and, other colleagues about like what their boss said and how they treated them. And I'm like, why did you not just leave? Like, on this. And I think right now, it started in our industry. People were kind of afraid to leave because of the pandemic. They weren't sure when the next pandemic happened. And then everyone's getting comfortable, but now everyone's concerned they don't want to leave because of the economic downturn. But I think when all that recovers, people are going to be like, yeah, I'm sick of my boss who says like slightly offhand comments. I'm sick of, this place where they're not using Slack and I have to like work 24/7. So I think like that sort of stuff has to be resolved. And I think truly creating some at least like better workspaces in the future.
No, absolutely. I mean, to me, it's really like two opposite. On one hand, you have what I call the snowflakes that they wake up in the morning and what am I going to be offended by today?
Yeah.
Which, like, seriously, sometimes it's come on, get a life. But on the other hand, it's like, why would you continue in an environment which is toxic? Because at the end of the day, if you look economically speaking and security, the job security speaking, it's much more secure to build your own business than depending on anybody else.
Yeah.
And I think it's by 2027 that in the US, for the first time, the majority of the people working are going to be freelancers.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think we're definitely feeling that culture happening for sure. I think we need to figure out, this is the part that like I've always struggled with within the business. Like I made a very early statement that I was like, you have to hire all your people that work for you in the events industry as W-2. We're such a freelance esque culture within our industry that I think that sometimes it's really bad that people don't realize that how they have to pay taxes, how they don't have insurance, how they're protected if they get hurt. I think sometimes when you're a contractor too, you don't get the benefits of working within a business and having that culture. But I think something's going to shift where everybody's going to we'll do this, but there may be some new laws that come out that protect people. Maybe it's that companies will figure out ways to have contractors, but still include them as part of the organization. I think there's going to be some really interesting things that definitely happen that help with that freelance-esque culture for sure. Because I think that's very uniquely the events industry is this oh, hey, I don't actually work for one company. I work for 20 different companies, or I might even work primarily for one company, but they treat me like a contractor because they want that variability aspect of it too. So it's going to be very interesting for sure.
And the other thing you were mentioning reminds me of a recent conversation is about people moving to Montana or Kansas or a more remote place. The one thing that is needed is the last mile of the connection to the internet.
Yeah.
From the moment you have that, it was very interesting. I think this conversation was about, some the people like Elon Musk.
Yeah, like Starlink and everything like that.
Yeah, and they're talking about in the future because of technology to have a universal what's the word?
Connection internet, like universal. Are you talking about universal basic income?
Thank you very much. Universal basic income. But then all the industry that have shifted, the factories that have closed, and with the internet, if you can go just move there and create businesses and train people instead of having, ghost cities or ghost places that you can enjoy a better life as well.
Yeah. And I think we're gonna, right now, I think we're feeling the negative effects of this displacement, right? Like people in Phoenix right now are complaining that housing costs are going up, right? I read an article, I was curious what was going on in Montana too. Some TV show came out and a lot of people are moving to Montana because of it and also the displacement piece. But now people in Montana are our house prices are going up. And I think you'll get that initial frustration of it. But then what will happen is then it will even out. We're just feeling the initial flood of it where there's a spike, there's a high demand, low supply. But as things start to even up, I think it'd be awesome. I think in the future, if you look at a map from space and you see right now, all the lights are on the edges of the cities, near the coast, you get some spikes in some places like Phoenix here. But I think it would be great for it just to even all out and everybody's just spread all across and we actually utilize all this space that we have within our country. I think that would be absolutely awesome.
That's nice. I actually have a map here at home with the NASA. That is
nice.
Exactly what you're talking about. It's quite unique.
I love it. I love it. I'll add one last trend. I think that will be really important for our industry specifically too. So I was talking about it earlier. Is I think that we chose to do this inbound marketing really early, and I think it was almost too early in some ways. But now I'm feeling it's kind of coming past. But I think that the way that people buy is totally changing because I think in our industry, we were primarily run by people much older than me. And I mean, if I started my business in 2007, so I was in high school in 2007. So you can kind of do some math about how old do you think I am? There's definitely, I think, a generation much older than me that was running the industry. Well, I think what happened is when the pandemic broke out, a lot of them were I don't want to do this virtual event stuff. I'm not interested. I don't like technology. I got into this because, XYZ, whatever it is. And I think they left the industry. And then what happened is all the people who knew how to do this, like they say digital native is the term, but I've learned that that's technically an ageist thing to call them. So we're calling people that are really comfortable with technology. They got asked to put on these webinars, got put on these virtual events because they knew how to code a basic amount of HTML because they've had a MySpace page, right? And so I think a lot of them rose up. They went from being the like marketing assistant to now they're the marketing director, like in the last 2 years. And then the people who were in charge of this stuff are now gone. So I think that there's been a huge role shift that now we are gone from being, one generation having the industry to a completely different generation runs it. And I think that that's going to change cultures and people and within the business is that you need to design your business around that. Like if you're not remote, I think that this newer generation is going to be like, why do I want to work there?
Yep.
Oh, you don't use Slack? Well, then how are we going to talk? Email? Oh, I'm really sorry. I hate email. You want to talk to me on the phone? Phone. Like I think all that sort of stuff is going to come into effect really, really fast. If not, we're already feeling it right now.
To your point, then it makes the culture and the importance of values even more important because that's basically the umbrella that can cover the different generation working together in a company.
Totally. And I think you have to be like blatantly obvious with it too. Like, like at Endless, we've been doing culture interviews for years, and it's our last interview we do, and we like are really brutal. We ask like hard questions. Like we got, for example, shout out to Candace, by the way, from our community, but she was like, why do you ask what typing speed on the application? And I say, because if I see you have a slow typing speed, chances are you don't use a keyboard a lot. And if you don't use a keyboard a lot, I'm about to hand you 5 new tools you've never heard of, and I'm going to make you take a class in them. And if you don't really feel comfortable just learning new tools, and, if you use Microsoft Teams, you need to learn to switch to Slack, or if you're used to, Outlook and now you have to switch to Gmail, if you're not comfortable with these kind of like software changes, like Endless isn't for you. And I'm totally cool with that. Like I think like being able to like incorporate, like realize what your culture really is and try to stand out, I think is really, really important because like everything starts to feel like a blur and feels like the same, I think, after a while.
So the ninja level in that case is those who can look at you and keep typing at the same time.
Yeah. And like I'm not a big fan of like multitasking necessarily. I don't think it's necessarily I consider it a myth, right? But I think that somebody who, when they start getting blown up with a lot of messages, they feel really comfortable. Like within our culture, for example, we're remote and we don't have an IT department. Like I'm kind of the IT guy because I'm naturally really techie. But I'm really there to answer like a question that no one else can answer. We primarily like have a channel where people are helping each other. We tell you to reach out to the support of the software itself. But like, it's one of these things where like, if your computer takes a dump and stops working, like if you are not comfortable figuring out where to go get another laptop or to use your boyfriend's laptop and get onboarded right real quick or whatever it is, or to self-diagnose that you need to wipe your computer or, try plugging in and plugging it back in again. If you can't do those things, like Endless isn't a good culture for you because like we just don't have that support to be able to do that. So that's exactly why we look for those sort of people too, is because we've had people we brought in and we overwhelm them and and because Will talks super fast, and I think very fast. I think that's translated into the culture of the company, just kind of like not by design, but it's kind of from osmosis.
I get it. Absolutely. But I can still follow what you're saying. So even as non-English native, it's okay.
That's what I hope for. I was like, whenever I do my presentations, like, tell me to slow down if you need to. And then luckily I've done a couple like international presentations where like one time, speaking of which, random story, but I was in Russia telling the story of how I started my company. And I had to have a translator because like no one there really spoke English except for like the very young Russians. And they had a translator, but they could only translate one sentence at a time. I've never spoken so slow in my entire life. I only got through like maybe 15% of the whole story. Whereas normally I can fit like from high school all the way to like years after college in like grave detail in an hour-long presentation.
That's funny. It reminded me of this story about the American speaking in Japan.
Oh,
and
tell me this one.
He's been told not to tell any jokes. And he got carried away, tells the jokes, and the entire conference started laughing, and he felt very good about it. And afterwards, he went to the translator. He said, I'm sorry, I got carried away, but obviously it worked very well. So, but how did you translate that part of the story? And the translator looked at him and says, sir, as soon as we realized that you were telling a joke, we told everyone in the headphones, the speaker is telling a joke. When he's going to be over, we will let you know. At that moment, please laugh.
That's so great.
I got plenty like that for an international meeting.
I love that. That's a great one.
Well, it's really a pleasure to work with you. I could do that for hours, but obviously with the format of the podcast. Let me ask you one last question. And I got that Clay Eberts, a friend who mentioned that to Jason Gaignard, as another friend who created a absolutely phenomenal community called MMT Mastermind Talk.
Cool.
And I always have that last question, which I love. When we meet with a bottle of champagne in 1 year, what are we going to be celebrating?
Oh my gosh, it's one of the best interview questions I think I've ever been asked. Man, what are we going to be celebrating 1 year from now with a bottle of champagne? This is such a cool question too, because like it forces me to dream now too.
Yeah.
The thing is, I'm not good at dreaming on the spot. I need like a whiteboard and like silence or sometimes loud drum and bass music. I think what it would be is that we come together and that we as a like Endless itself has built it. Like for me right now, my biggest challenge is the new wave of marketing. So like, because you're into podcasting and things like that too, like I am, like, I think you would really appreciate if I crack the nut on what generates marketing and buzz and actual buying intent for people of our new ideal customer profile in the future. And, I also hope that we'll be celebrating being friends together for many years.
Awesome. Thank you very much. My last cherry on the cake question. How do people get in touch with you?
So I used to say like I'm on every social network, you can reach out to me, but now I'm like kind of anti-social media because it's distracting. So I'm not on Facebook. I'm not on Instagram. You can find me on Reddit sometimes, but my big place to find me is you can go to helloendless.com, download all of our content. I have tons of content in there. Check it out. And if you really want to reach me, if you reach out to any person within the team, they'll probably set up a meeting with me. The second place is that we just started an online community called eventprofscommunity.com. And it's like designed to basically show how you can build a community around an event. And so we're using an event platform. It has its own dedicated app and everything. It's kind of like a private social network just for event professionals. But if you go to eventprofscommunity.com, you sign up, you get admitted and accepted into it. There's literally, you can direct message me. And that's the fastest way to get a hold of me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thanks so much, Eric. It was a pleasure. This was awesome.
Thank you, Will, for sharing your journey, your insights, and those great trends we should be paying attention to. Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your network and connect with me on LinkedIn or join my Facebook group at www.eventbusinessformula.com/group. Thank you.